Okay, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're looking forward to telling you about all the work we've been doing on xSTUDIO over the last 12 months and getting you fully up to date on the status of the project. We've been really busy, as you'll see, so there's lots of good stuff to talk about. Please note that this session is being recorded, and please stay muted for the duration until the Q&A at the end. And if you have any questions that you think of as we go along, feel free to drop them into the chat and we'll go through them after I've finished the presentation. So here's the order of play. What I'll do is I'll start off giving you a brief overview of the project and what xSTUDIO is all about, just to set the scene. Then I'll go into the status of version 0.12, which is the code base that's currently available on the ASWF GitHub. We've done some important updates to this quite recently. I'll then spend a bit more time going over version 1.0. This is currently pre-release, and it's got some huge improvements over the 0.x release. Notably, it's got a more flexible embedded design UI and a multi-track timeline interface and some more advanced grading tools, among many other improvements. V1 has been very much our focus over the last year, so hopefully you'll get an idea of what it's all about today. As part of the V1 discussion, I'll share some screen capture demos so we can get a good look at it. I'm also going to include a quick look at the pipeline integration plugin that we've developed at DNEG, which is a parallel effort to the work on the core application, but there are some features in that which we'd like to show you today, as we think it shows off some of the new capabilities of xSTUDIO that are coming through the pipeline. And then finally, we'll outline the work that we're starting to plan for the coming year. So very briefly, let me introduce xSTUDIO for anyone attending who's not familiar with the project. xSTUDIO is it's a cross-platform desktop application for VFX and animation playback and review. So in a nutshell, it's a media player on steroids that can be heavily customized, but will also work out of the box for many image review scenarios. Its design is then intended to get the most out of your computer's CPU and GPU compute power, so that high resolution, high bit depth, and high frame rate video formats will play accurately and faithfully, as long as your hardware is capable of doing that. The core application also includes accurate color management via integration of OpenColor.io libraries. And another key aspect of xSTUDIO is this intended to be highly extendable, so that is, developers and technical users can add plugins themselves to add features and capabilities to the application, supporting their own workflow and integrating the application with their own proprietary systems. So I'll do a quick recap on version 0.12. This was our first release version, and the v0.x series was deployed internally at DNEG nearly 2 years ago. It will remain the official open source release version for just a little while longer. Version 0 is a high-performance review tool with an easy-to-use interface that allows one to quickly load media and build and organize playlists. FFmpeg, OpenEXR media readers allow for a broad codec and image format support, depending on how you build the FFmpeg libraries. We included OpenColor.io version 2 GPU accelerated color management, as well as on-screen sketching and notes tools, allowing for creative feedback comments. And a key component of our rollout at DNEG was development of a data source plugin, and this provided a novel front end for ShotGrid, allowing artists to query ShotGrid in a fast and flexible way to pull in the media that they needed to see for their image review workflows. And after a successful rollout internally at DNEG, we released the code base with the sponsorship of the ASWF last January as part of the Open Review initiative. The code base that's up on GitHub has been pretty stable since then, apart from a major contribution that came from Epic Games, who added Windows build compatibility, which was a big undertaking. The Windows build work started sometime earlier last year, and it was stalled when it was about 90% complete, unfortunately, because the team that were doing the work became unexpectedly unavailable. The code that was made public was done so with the caveat that it it was possible to build on Windows, but there was a bit more work to do to finalize it and make the build steps foolproof and enabling some features of xSTUDIO, like the Python API. And because this work had to be paused before it was 100% complete, there were some people keen to try xSTUDIO on Windows, but left a bit frustrated. But the great news is that Michael Kessler from Epic Games was able to put some of his time into the project in April and May this year. We now have a complete solution for building on Windows. So Kessler's work means that building xSTUDIO on Windows, it's really straightforward. It requires very little technical expertise. You just need to install two major dependencies, the Microsoft Visual Studio and the Qt SDK libraries. And then it's just a few clicks to run the build, which will complete without any supervision. So Kessler's work's now merged into the main branch on the xSTUDIO GitHub repo. Another addition to version 0 capabilities, a plugin that enables output on the Blackmagic Design DeckLink PCI SDI card output cards. So the README on, I'll just put there's the link for the repo if anyone wants to check it out. That outlines how to build and install the plugin. If you need to drive an SDI capable video device like professional TV panels, HDR screens, or projectors, this is what you would need. We've got SDI gear in our screening rooms at DNEG, so this plugin has been production tested and it's performing well. So let me get on to xSTUDIO version 1. Version 1 includes a big redesign of the user interface, as well as a lot of other under the hood work that was needed to support a better UI. So I want to explain why we did that and the major inputs that drove that effort. And what I'd really like to emphasize is the fact that a lot of xSTUDIO has so far been developed by DNEG's internal team, and as such, we've been able to be really nimble about how we deployed upgrades to DNEG, as well as bug fixes and so on. So we set up discussion groups for users to ask questions, to give feedback and answer our questions about their workflows and what they'd like to see in the application. So sometimes we could even turn around a new feature in a matter of hours, as long as it wasn't a big one, in response to requests or ideas coming through those channels. DNEG is a big organization, and it's got some, 7,000, I'm not sure now, but 7,000 crew members. So we had a broad as well as deep pool of users to tap their knowledge and ideas to feed back into xSTUDIO's design. And this way of working has been really instrumental in how the product has been developed in the last year. We've also got the key role of the product owner, who's Jarrett. Chaz has been at the forefront of encouraging and sustaining these productive discussions with the user base and distilling a lot of feedback from many individuals into a single coherent vision for how the application should look and feel and the details of how it works. Chaz's day job is as a VFX supervisor, which means he's already naturally got an extremely keen attention to detail and an understanding of VFX and animation review. So as well as this high-level role, Chaz is currently supervising one of DNEG's biggest and most complicated VFX shows. And this alpha version of xSTUDIO has already been his review tool for several months now. So if something doesn't work exactly as expected, or if there's something missing or in the wrong place, Chaz will ticket it straight away, or he'll get up straight into Zoom and show us the problem firsthand. So that's been a huge part of the story as well. And then we've also had some great input from DNEG's UI UX team. They really peeled back the lid on understanding what good UI UX design is and how to achieve it with research-led methods, as well as the visual design of the interface. So, for example, they conducted sessions where artists were observed using xSTUDIO for the first time. And these sessions taught us about discoverability and how some features of the app were obscured from the user. And it taught us how our own assumptions about how people would or should use the tool were often quite wrong. So to some people here who might work on commercial software development, this isn't anything new, but to the core xSTUDIO team, who for most of our careers, we've been developing, proprietary software on really tight turnarounds for our colleagues in VFX production, where often the UI was quickly cobbled together just to provide something minimum that would just work. It's the first time we had a chance to put that sort of UX theory into practice, and we hope it's sort of helped realize some big improvements to xSTUDIO. So in a nutshell, we had tons of really valuable real world feedback and experience pouring in since the adoption of version 0.x, and this inspired and guided us to rework some key features of xSTUDIO. So this is a screenshot of version 0. We've got an interface for viewing and entering notes. There's the drawing toolbox, the grading toolbox, our shop browser integration plugin interface. You can probably spot one problem already. I mean, this is a bit exaggerated because you probably wouldn't have all these windows open at the same time usually, but the workspace quickly gets crowded. The pop-up interfaces have to be flagged as always on top windows, because otherwise they'll be hidden behind the main interface. Users couldn't get to them, or if they could, it was awkward because they had to go to the desktop taskbar and find the right button to bring the pop-up back. The pop-up windows, when they're always on top, they get in the way of the main interface and you need to hide and show them frequently. So this was especially true of the shop browser plugin, which is the panel that users would be interacting with most frequently. And we knew this issue was only going to get worse when we added the multi-track timeline, which is also going to take up a lot of screen real estate. And at the same time, there are still some users that might not use the timeline at all, while others would have it open permanently. So, of course, we could have embedded these interfaces into the main xSTUDIO window fairly easily, and maybe offer multiple layouts that could have switched from, being switched from a button tray. But another theme of the feedback was that users all wanted slightly different things when we canvassed their opinion about the best layout of these essential components. So some preferred the media list on the left, some on the right, some wanted it hidden most of the time, some needed it there all the time, and so on and so forth. Some actually said they liked the tools appearing in pop-out windows, while others hated it. So it became increasingly clear that what was needed for a sort of universally satisfactory experience was a fully configurable interface where the user could choose exactly what was visible, where, and how the window was divided up to contain those elements. But the big problem was that in version 0, these layouts that already existed were really hardwired into the UI code, and unpicking it was going to be a difficult task. So, as well as the general interface layout problem, we also had a great new design for the overall look of the interface from our UI UX team, which we felt was a vast improvement on the original look that we'd come up with ourselves. Being software devs rather than graphic designers, we'd given it our best shot, but essentially we were amateurs in that realm. The UI designers provided us with a comprehensive spec for the widget designs, the color palette, and the layout details. And this was based on a thorough review that they did of the state-of-the-art interfaces of popular commercial playback and editing software. We weren't setting out to copy those applications, but we wanted to align with the established paradigms in that niche, so that new users, are more likely to be immediately comfortable when they're, presented with something that feels like a familiar interface. So ultimately, all this led us to deciding to rewrite most of the UI layer in order to implement this design and a load of features to give us the flexibility that we were going to need. And then at the same time, we kind of went through very much the same process with our integration plugin, which we call Shop Browser. And once users had the first version in their hands with the DNEG rollout of version 0, they loved it, but it prompted a cascade of ideas on how to improve it and make it more flexible and powerful. And the big feature that people wanted was in-context review to see renders in the sequence edit. We knew we needed this anyway. We needed those timeline features included, as with auto-conforming in particular, auto-conforming versions and renders into an edit. So the basic idea that we started from is that you can execute database queries through configurable preset filters, but these use metadata attached to the clips that are already in the timeline. And then we can populate new video tracks in the timeline with the query results. So to recap, version 1 of xSTUDIO includes a redesign of the interface. It's much more flexible in the way that widgets and interfaces are laid out. It's fully configurable by the user, and I've got a video coming up to demonstrate it. We've also put a lot of work into a better look and feel. We think it's more polished and professional than our original attempt in version 0. When we embarked on this, we took the opportunity to tackle some of the problems with the UI code base, where there was a lot of boilerplate cut and pasted about the code, which wasn't as well structured as we would have liked. A lot of the way the UI was assembled was kind of hard coded, and we were finding that exposing new bits of data in the back end through the UI layer was quite laborious to do. So we addressed those issues. For those that are into UI development with Qt, the whole thing is now largely driven by data models via the Q abstract item model class. So we're employing the model view delegate design pattern that Qt recommends. We're using that heavily through the whole of the UI layer. A key part of this is that it's easy to author extension plugins to add UI components to xSTUDIO. In fact, some of the key features that are already in the core app with complex UI components like the grading tools and the annotation tools are already implemented as plugins. So we already know we've tested that part of the API when we've built those tools in. And really all of this reworking the UI was undertaken to support the inclusion of a non-linear editing interface, which itself was going to be a big component. We didn't want to write the NLE component without addressing the known issues with the rest of the UI beforehand. So next, I've got some demos to share. I've got 4 videos, and it runs a total of 13 minutes. So bear with me. Got a video capture of xSTUDIO inside xSTUDIO, which is quite hard to look at, I have to admit. Right, doesn't load. Oops. Full screen. Okay, here we go. So just somebody shout out if you can't hear my voice. So I've recorded a monologue over these videos. So I'm going to quickly show you around the new xSTUDIO interface. I'm going to start off talking about layouts. So xSTUDIO will have these multiple layouts which can be selected in this top right tray showing your layouts, and then this button here manages the layout, so you can add or remove layouts. So let's create a new layout. I'm going to call it grading. What that's done is it's added a button up here, and now my layout is just a viewport at the moment, but I can start building my layout by dividing the window. So I'm going to split the pane horizontally, and I'm going to each pane, each subdivision of the main window has a tab at the top that lets you choose which UI element fills that panel. So in this case, I want the top panel to be a viewport. At the moment, we've got 2 viewports. It's not particularly useful. I can't see a use case for multiple viewports, but so the bottom one I'm now going to set to grading tools, like this, and then I can split this panel again, and I can set this one to be, let's say, media. So that's showing me my media list now, and I can also have multiple tabs within one panel, so I can hit this plus button and I can have playlists there as well, so that I can switch between media and playlists nice and quickly. So we can start building layouts, and all of the panels are obviously resizable, and whatever configuration you come up with gets saved against in your user preferences, so it persists between sessions. Of course, there wouldn't be much use if it didn't do that. Another feature of this, you can turn off the visibility of these tabs, because in a lot of cases in the panels you'll have a single UI element. You won't have what I've got here where I've got media and playlists. This is just grading tools in this panel and the viewport and one above it. So I can say hide single tabs. That claims back some of the screen real estate and tidies up the interface quite nicely. One thing to mention is that the UI elements that fill the panels, all of these, so let's just, here's another example, Python console, I can start scripting in there. All of these in this list, some of them are provided by plugins, so it's quite easy to extend
the xSTUDIO interface through plugins and add your plugin interface to this list if you're into developing plugins. One last thing I want to show you is if I go to the Preferences dialog under the File menu, we've added some tweaks to change the look of the interface. This is because it's something that users have a strong preference for that's different from one user to the next, so we've given them control. You can set the UI brightness through these controls. You can set the brightness of the text, and the overall brightness of the interface. Some people prefer a darker interface. You might want to dim the text a bit. There's also this button, UI flat theme. This is a bit of feedback we got in one of our ASWF meetings. Originally, xSTUDIO version 1, we were adding these subtle gradients to certain widgets and buttons. You might see it more clearly if I brighten the interface. So these buttons have got a subtle gradient. This is purely just a look and feel thing. We thought it looked a bit slicker and more professional. However, it was pointed out that this is not a great feature for image review because the gradients can interfere with your perception of shade and colour in a way that you might not even notice. So there's simply a button here which can turn that off and flatten all of the widgets, get rid of those gradients. So
Ted, I think we lost your audio.
Ted, we can't hear you, I don't think. So you might be muted, but yeah, we've lost your audio completely, Ted. I've messaged Ted to let him know his audio's gone, so maybe he'll drop out and rejoin.
Yeah, he said his Zoom crashed, so I think he'll be right back.
Although we can still see him. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Zoom for you.
Well, while we wait for him to rejoin, I will just take a moment to remind everybody that Open Source Days is happening on Sunday in Denver and virtually. It's free to attend. So if you have not already registered, make sure to do so. And then we have a ton of virtual town halls, more happening today and tomorrow. And then for those SIGGRAPH attendees, we will have a whole day of open source BOFs at SIGGRAPH on Monday, the 29th. So hope to see many of you there. While we wait, why doesn't everybody in the chat maybe put in where you're from and whether or not you'll be in Denver next week?
I put a check mark as being in Denver.
Hello, everyone. I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Great.
welcome back.
Sorry about that. It's Zoom that crashed. I thought it was really awkward because I thought xSTUDIO had crashed, but it was Zoom. Right. Let me try and get this going again. Let me share my screen. Okay. Right, this is a intro to the timeline features. Oh, hang on. Did I share my audio? Sorry, I'm going to stop sharing and share again. Let's try that.
So let's take a look at the new timeline features in xSTUDIO. First thing I'm going to do is create a timeline from scratch. I'm going to do it I'll start off by dumping a folder with some media into xSTUDIO. It's created a playlist that contains that media off disk. I'm then going to select the playlist and do add sequence. So it adds a sequence underneath the playlist. Then select the media in the playlist and drop it into the sequence object. And then if I double click on the sequence, we can then see the timeline. So the drag drop action has automatically added a new video track called dropped, and it's put all of the media in the order that it was dropped into that video track. So now we've got all that media on disk, just sort of as a string out, as it were. You probably don't want that. I can just click on that video track and remove it, add a new video track, and then I can start dropping in individual pieces of media, or multiple pieces of media. Going to add a second track, start dropping things into there. So to start building timelines, it's really trivial and hopefully nice and user friendly. Next up, I'm going to go to the file menu. I'm going to go to import OTIO, and here I have an Adobe Premiere project. It's a showreel edit from editorial at DNEG. So if I hit open on that XML file, OTIO does its magic. It translates that that Premiere file, and then DNEG is able to xSTUDIO is able to build the timeline, and it's got all of the video tracks and all the media from that Premiere project, as one would expect, and we can start playing through immediately. So it loads very quickly. It scales really well. We've tried it with much bigger edits with thousands of clips, and it holds up really nicely. A couple of other things to show you. We've got color highlighting on video tracks, which can really help with visualizing the data in your track, and then we can color code individual tracks. You can set the color on that one to blue, and then we also have started to add some editing tools, some essentials. So if I click on this button, I can now start rolling this clip like this. I can also trim the clip, move it around. I'm still working on these features. Ripple edit and so on is going to be in there pretty soon. So that's the very basics of what we've got in xSTUDIO now. Another quick feature I'll show you quickly is loop selection. It's very simple. You just select some clips, and the playhead will just loop over that selection. So it's a really quick way to view individual clips or a couple of clips within the timeline just through selection. and so on and so forth. So that's just a really quick introduction to the timeline features in xSTUDIO. So let's take a look at the new.
And then we've got a video here showing the new grading features in xSTUDIO.
New grading tools that are coming with xSTUDIO version 1. What we've got here is the grading interface. It's the usual sort of controls that we'd expect to see: saturation, exposure, contrast, RGB, slope, offset and power. And we can grade the whole media clip. Thus, I'm going to bin that. One nice feature that we've got now is that you can drop a polygon and use that as a mask to apply a grade. So if I start off by dropping some points into the image to create the polygon, I can move that around, and then I can, let's say, bump the exposure like this. There's a softness dial, which is crucial to the usability of that. And then the other important thing is we can build up multiple grading layers. So let's say we'll use the ellipse tool here, and we'll make him green just for the purpose of the demonstration, like this. And what that does is it adds grading notes to the media item, which could then be perhaps published and shared with other people in your team.
And then finally, I've got a video here showcasing a few features of our pipeline integration. Just sort of scratching the surface really, but we wanted to share it because it's got some nice stuff that interacts with the timeline and shows auto-conforming features.
Hi, I'm just very quickly going to show you some of the new stuff we've been working on with DNEG's pipeline integration, and particularly to do with how we do reviews in the context of the sequence. Because the timeline features in xSTUDIO are all brand new, I thought this would be interesting to share. There's several different ways to pull media into xSTUDIO in a timeline. I'll just show you a couple of them. To do a full deep dive into this tool would actually take over an hour, and that's not really going to fit here. But let's get on with it, and I'll show you a couple of things anyway. So what I'm doing at the moment is I am looking at playlists that have been published to this particular show, some recent playlists. I'm going to search for the name of the anim supervisor and have a look at one of his dailies playlists. I will load that playlist. So in our playlist panel there's a playlist appearing, and it's loading a bunch of media that's been put into that playlist for the supervisor to look at. They're individual media clips. They're not in the timeline. They're not necessarily ordered. In fact, they span more than one sequence. But what I can do is I can select all of the media in this list, right click, and I can then go to conform to new sequence. What that's going to do for each bit of media, it's going to find out the relevant sequence. It's going to load that sequence, in other words the timeline, and then it's going to conform each piece of media into the relevant timeline. So there are actually 5 sequences that are covered by this particular dailies playlist. If I double click on this, here's the timeline. So there's just 3 shots that are being looked at in this daily session from this sequence. But what xSTUDIO has done is it's gone and retrieved the sequence, which is an OTIO file published by our editorial department, and then it's auto-conformed the media into the timeline, and it uses shot markers that are shot metadata that is part of the the sequence that's published by editorial. So in this case, this is another sequence where there's quite a bit more going on. So there's a bunch of different anim play blasts that have been auto-conformed into this sequence. So that means that the anim soup can review everything in the cut context very easily, but it can still be driven by the playlist that a production are putting together. So that's one way we can load timelines. There are various others, like I said. If I clear the session, we could say, so now I can, in our shop browser, I'm going to go to the tree view. I'm going to select a sequence, and I am going to click on the approved cuts query. So for this sequence, for a given sequence, we're only going to have a single current approved cut, of course. There it is. If I double click on this, it's going to load the cut immediately. And here is the same thing as before. It's the cut that our editorial team publish. But now what I can do, another way to populate the cut, is I can do add video track. I can right click over a video track. I can go to auto conform, and let's say I want to see latest anim. It'll pull the latest anim for every shot. Now we're at quite early stages on this show, so there actually isn't a lot of anim on that particular sequence. Let's try something else. I'm going to try auto conform layout, latest layout. Might be a bit more going on there. Yeah, exactly. So now we can see the whole sequence, the layout for the whole sequence. So that's another way we can do it. The queries that drive the auto-conforming are fully configurable. I won't go into the details of that right now, but it's quite powerful, and it means that we can pull in, the output of particular departments quite easily, and add extra filter elements to those queries to narrow down our search for whatever reason that we might have. So that's, in a nutshell, is some of the, a very quick look at the sequence-based integration that we have developed in xSTUDIO here at DNEG. Good. Close that, and I'm going to try and get back to, excuse me, Brian, where are we? Okay. So, sorry about that problem I had earlier. I've lost a bit of time now, so I'll try and rattle through this as quick as I can. What I've shown you of xSTUDIO version 1, it's being alpha tested by about 30 supervisors and leads at DNEG, some of whom have been using it heavily for several weeks. We've already had loads of great feedback. We're able to iron out some of the glitches and bugs, so it's going to be robust for a full rollout the rest of DNEG in late August, when everyone's back from their summer holidays. Then, following hopefully a successful internal rollout, we'll be releasing the code base of version 1 on GitHub. Another thing that we want to do, last year I did demo a working version of xSTUDIO version 0 on macOS, but this coincided with the beginning of the version 1 rewrites, so we put the release of the macOS port, the build compatibility, on hold while we concentrate on V1. So once V1 is out, we can get back and finish off the macOS support. Then we're also looking at updating the dependencies to align with VFX reference 2024. So notably, we'll be upgrading Qt from 5.15 to 6.5, updating FFmpeg to version 6. Another big plank in the open source realm is that we really need to work up is the user docs, the API docs, and provide some really good working demos and example plugins to help users and developers in the community get started with using and integrating xSTUDIO in their own environment. And I mentioned that building xSTUDIO on Windows is now really straightforward. We'd like to improve things on the Linux side. We do have build instructions for some popular
popular Linux distros, but if you follow these as they are, it does involve installing some dependencies to your system, which isn't ideal really. What everyone really wants is a more sort of containerized build process that produces an application that's relocatable and where all the dependencies are bundled into the application tree. So of course, people experienced in building software in Linux can already do this for themselves. And we originally envisaged xSTUDIO would be picked up by studios that have dedicated build engineers to take care of that. But we'd really like to make this more accessible to individual users and teams that don't have the in-house build and deployment expertise that's needed at the moment. And then finally, this is a really big feature that we haven't really started to break ground on, but that'll be a focus for the coming year, is remote sync sessions between xSTUDIO instances to support cross-site collaborative reviews. So please do watch this space. And then finally, you know, xSTUDIO is open source. It's still pretty brand spanking new, and the core application is still under rapid development at the moment. But as we get ready to release version 1, we do expect it to stabilize in the coming months as version 1 beds in. So this means it's a good time for anyone interested in using xSTUDIO and thinking about contributing to the project to think about getting involved. So please do join us at the community meetings, the ORI community meetings, where we share updates on the project. That's a good place to get hold of the DNEG team if you want to talk to us directly about the project or get some help getting started. Until now, we've held off doing regular TSC meetings for xSTUDIO on its own because of the rapid development that's been going on in version 1. It didn't really make sense, and we didn't feel there was the demand for it at the moment, because I think a lot of potential adopters are quite reasonably have held back on investing in integrating xSTUDIO because they want to wait and see how it evolves. But we think that once version 1's out there, you know, it'd be a great time for anyone who's been thinking about using xSTUDIO to make a commitment and take it further. So subject to that demand, we can start TSC meetings if we start to get contributors from the community that's getting more involved. And if you are interested in getting started on hands-on developments, either writing integration, plugin, or working on the core app, you could always email us at that address, and we can give you access to the version 1 code base. It's not kind of secret as such. It's just we're not going to, you know, we don't put it onto the ASWF until it's, you know, properly released. And then, of course, you know, you are always free to submit PRs on the main GitHub site anyway. So that's been the case since we open sourced last year. And we do, you know, really welcome and encourage any involvement. We have had, apart from the Windows contribution from Epic Games, we've had some other people making small contributions. We really appreciate that, and we'd love to see more of it. So I'm finished. So we've got time, a little bit of time for Q&A. Sorry, it did go a little bit longer than I thought with that glitch. Let me check the chat. I'm going to stop the screen share. Oh yeah, I didn't mention in that video, yeah, I pixelized any images because we can only demo our integration using current production data. Yeah, cross-site sync, that's the big one. That's the big one that's left in a way. We're excited to get started on that. And that work will be beginning later in the year.